They took her badge, handed her a cardboard box, and told her she was finished. After 20 years of saving lives, Nurse Madeline Jenkins was frustrated for doing the one thing a doctor refused to do, saving a dying child against protocol. Broken, humiliated, and walking home in the pouring rain, Madeline thought her life was over. She was wrong. 2 military-grade Black Hawk helicopters weren't just landing in the city center. They were landing for her. The wind from the rotors nearly knocked her down, but the words screamed by the special ops soldier changed everything. "We don't want the doctor. We want the nurse." This is the story of how one woman went from unemployed to a national hero in less than an hour. The fluorescent lights of the Human Resources Office at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital in downtown Chicago hummed with a headache-inducing buzz that seemed specifically designed to break the human spirit. Madeline Jenkins sat on the edge of a gray, fabric-covered chair that smelled faintly of stale coffee and fear. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide the fact that they were shaking. These were hands that could insert an IV into a collapsing vein in a moving ambulance, hands that had held the hearts of trauma victims, hands that had steadied nervous fathers in the delivery room. But right now, facing the smirking face of Dr. Marcus Sterling and the cold, bureaucratic stare of HR Director Linda Halloway, those hands felt useless. "Insubordination," Linda said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the manila folder in front of her. She didn't look at Madeline. She looked at the paper as if the paper were the person she was firing. "Gross misconduct, violation of hospital hierarchy protocols. The list is extensive, Ms. Jenkins." Madeline took a breath, the air tasting of recycled antiseptic. "I saved the patient, Linda. The boy, Leo, he's alive. If I hadn't administered the epinephrine when I did, while Dr. Sterling was still debating the insurance authorization, that child would be in the morgue." Dr. Sterling shifted in his chair. He was a man who wore his stethoscope like a piece of jewelry rather than a tool. He was the chief of surgery, a man whose family name was plastered on the new oncology wing, and whose ego took up more space in the room than the furniture. "You undermined my authority in a critical trauma situation," Sterling said, his voice smooth, practically oily. "You are a nurse, Madeline. A highly paid, perhaps overqualified nurse, but a nurse nonetheless. You do not make decisions. You execute orders. When you pushed past me to access the crash cart, you created a hostile work environment." "I created a heartbeat." Madeline snapped, her composure cracking. His throat was closing up. "He was in anaphylaxis. You were on the phone with the legal department." "That is enough," Linda cut in, finally looking up. Her eyes were devoid of empathy. "The decision has been made. Madeline, Dr. Sterling has formally requested your termination effective immediately. We are revoking your access to the EMR system as we speak. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your locker." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Madeline looked at Sterling. He offered a small, triumphant smile, the smile of a man who had never been told no in his life, and wasn't about to start tolerating it from a 45-year-old trauma nurse with a mortgage and a bad back. "You're making a mistake," Madeline whispered. "It wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis." "The only mistake," Sterling said, standing up and buttoning his pristine white coat, "was thinking you were indispensable." The walk to her locker was a blur. It felt like a funeral procession for her own life. 20 years. She had started at St. Jude's when she was 25, fresh out of nursing school, full of idealism. She had survived the pandemic, the budget cuts, the strikes, and the endless nights of understaffing. She knew the name of every janitor, every cafeteria worker, and the favorite color of the security guard, old Mr. Henderson, who was currently looking at her with sad, confused eyes as he waited to escort her out. "I'm sorry, Madeline," Mr. Henderson mumbled as she dumped the contents of her locker into a small cardboard box. A stethoscope, a framed photo of her late husband Mark, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen, a ceramic mug that said, "Nurses call the shots." It looked pathetic. 2 decades of service reduced to a box that wouldn't even fill the passenger seat of her car. "It's not your fault, Fast Eddie," she said, using his nickname, trying to be brave. But her voice trembled. As she walked through the trauma ward one last time, the silence was deafening. The other nurses, Jessica Maria David, wouldn't meet her eyes. They knew what was happening. They knew that if they spoke up, if they defended her, Sterling would come for them next. The hospital wasn't a place of healing anymore. It was a kingdom, and the tyrant was on the throne. She reached the automatic glass doors of the emergency department entrance. The blast of cold October air hit her face, stinging her eyes. It was raining, of course it was raining. A grey, miserable drizzle that soaked the city in gloom. Mr. Henderson stopped at the threshold. "Take care of yourself, Madeline. You too, Eddie. Watch that blood pressure." The doors slid shut behind her with a final whoosh. Madeline Jenkins stood on the sidewalk, the rain instantly plastering her hair to her forehead. She clutched the cardboard box to her chest to keep the photo of Mark dry. She didn't have her car. It was in the shop for a transmission issue she couldn't afford to fix now. She had to walk 6 blocks to the train station. She took the first step, her sneakers squelching on the wet pavement. She was unemployed. She was alone. And for the first time in her life, she had absolutely nowhere to be. The city of Chicago moved around her, indifferent to her tragedy. Taxis splashed dirty water onto the curb. Businessmen with umbrellas rushed past, checking their watches. Madeline walked slowly, the weight of the box in her arms growing heavier with every step. Her mind was a chaotic loop of the meeting. Insubordination, hostile work environment. She replayed the moment with the boy, Leo. He was 8 years old. He had come in gasping, clutching his throat, his face turning a terrifying shade of blue. A severe reaction to a bee sting. His mother was screaming. Dr. Sterling had hesitated, worried about a pre-existing heart condition, noted in the file wasting precious seconds debating the dosage and liability. Madeline saw the light fading from the boy's eyes. She didn't think. She moved. She pushed the epinephrine. The boy gasped, the air rushing back into his lungs like a miracle. She had saved him, and it cost her everything. "Maybe I should have just let him handle it," she muttered to the wet pavement. "Maybe I'm just an old, stubborn nurse who doesn't know her place." She was 3 blocks away from the hospital, crossing a bridge over the Chicago River when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a visual change at first. It was a vibration. The puddles on the sidewalk began to ripple. The glass in the storefront windows to her left started to rattle. A low thrumming sound, deep and guttural, began to rise above the noise of the city traffic. It sounded like thunder, but it was rhythmic. Thwop, 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 thwop. Madeline stopped. She looked up. The low grey clouds seemed to be tearing apart. Passers-by stopped too. People pulled out their phones. Cars slowed down. The noise grew deafening, a physical pressure pressing against her chest. Then she saw them. 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters painted in matte black tore through the cloud layer, banking hard over the river. These weren't traffic choppers or news birds. These were military. They were flying aggressively low, barely clearing the tops of the skyscrapers. The downdraft hit the street instantly, sending trash cans rolling and snapping umbrellas inside out. Madeline shielded her eyes against the wind and rain. What in the world? The helicopters didn't head for the hospital helipad, which was blocks behind her. They didn't head for the airport. They slowed into a hover directly over the intersection of Wacker Drive and State Street, right where Madeline was standing. Panic erupted on the street. People screamed and scattered, assuming it was a terror attack or a crash landing. Cars slammed on their brakes, causing a pile-up of screeching tires. But Madeline didn't run. Years of trauma nursing had trained her to freeze and assess, not flee. She watched as the lead helicopter descended with terrifying precision. It wasn't landing on a pad. It was landing right in the middle of the intersection. The pilot was skilled, insanely skilled. The skids of the Black Hawk touched down on the asphalt, with barely a bump, the rotors slicing the air feet above the traffic lights. The second helicopter hovered above, providing cover, a sniper clearly visible in the side door. The side door of the landed helicopter slid open before it even settled. 3 men jumped out. They were dressed in tactical gear, but not police SWAT. This was high-level military, no insignias, just dark green and black with earpieces and assault rifles strapped to their chests. But the man in the lead wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a tablet. He scanned the terrified crowd, ignoring the honking cars and the screaming pedestrians. He looked frantic. He spun around, his eyes locking onto people, dismissing them and moving on. Then he saw her. He saw the woman in the soaked blue scrubs, clutching a soggy cardboard box. The soldier pointed directly at her. He didn't just point. He started sprinting toward her, dodging a stopped taxi. Madeline took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. What did I do? Is this about the hospital? Did Sterling call the police? No. The police don't have Black Hawks. The soldier reached her in seconds. He was tall, imposing, with rain dripping off his tactical helmet. He looked at her scrubs, then at her face, then at the ID badge that was still clipped to her pocket. The one Linda hadn't physically taken, only deactivated. "Madeline Jenkins!" the soldier roared over the scream of the rotors. Madeline nodded, unable to speak. She gripped her box tighter, as if it could protect her. The soldier tapped his earpiece. "Asset located. I repeat, asset located. We are at the extraction point." He looked back at Madeline. "Ma'am, you need to come with us, now." I was just fired." Madeline stammered, the absurdity of the sentence tasting like ash in her mouth. "I don't work for the hospital anymore. If you need a doctor, Dr. Sterling is—" "We don't want a doctor," the soldier shouted, grabbing her arm with a grip that was firm but desperate. "And we sure as hell don't want Sterling. Intel says you're the trauma lead on shift. You're the specialist for pediatric thoracic trauma, correct?" "Yes, but—" "Ma'am, the president's goddaughter is dying in a secure location 20 miles from here. Her airway is crushed. The Secret Service medical team can't stabilize her. They asked for the best thoracic nurse in the Midwest. 3 different surgeons named you." Madeline's eyes widened. "The president's?" "We have 4 minutes to get you in the air before she suffocates," the soldier said, pulling her toward the helicopter. "Drop the box, Madeline. We're going." "My husband's picture," she cried, resisting. The soldier didn't hesitate. He grabbed the box from her, tucked it under his arm like a football, and swept her off her feet with his other arm. "Then the box comes too. Go, go, go." He practically threw her into the back of the Black Hawk. Madeline scrambled across the metal floor, her wet scrubs sliding on the diamond plate. The soldier jumped in after her and slammed the door. "Lift off, go punch it!" he screamed into the headset. The stomach-churning sensation of zero gravity hit Madeline as the helicopter surged upward, banking hard away from the buildings. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw the street below shrinking. She saw the hospital in the distance, a grey block where her career had ended 10 minutes ago. The soldier strapped her in, handing her a headset. "Put this on." She trembled as she pulled the headset over her ears. The noise dampened to a hum. "My name is Captain Miller," the soldier said, his voice crystal clear now. "I apologize for the extraction method, but we are in a code-critical situation. We were told you were at St. Jude's. We landed on the roof, but the administrator said you'd been let go. He tried to send the chief of surgery instead." Madeline felt a jolt of cold anger. "Sterling?" "Yeah, that's the guy," Miller said, wiping rain from his visor. "He tried to board the bird, said he was the superior medical authority." "What happened?" Madeline asked. Miller cracked a grim smile. "I told him my orders were for Jenkins. He refused to step back. My sniper put a laser dot on his chest and told him to sit down. He sat down." Madeline stared at him. She imagined Marcus Sterling, the god of St. Jude's, cowering on the wet helipad, while a military sniper told him he wasn't wanted. A strange, hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. "Where are we going?" she asked, looking out at the grey expanse of Lake Michigan, rushing by beneath them. "O'Hare Air Force Reserve Base," Miller said. "Air Force One is on the tarmac, but the medical bay is set up in the hangar. It's a mess, Madeline. We have a structural collapse at a fundraising event. The girl, it's bad. They have the equipment, but they don't have the hands. The flight surgeon is overwhelmed." Madeline looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, but differently now. This wasn't fear of unemployment. This was the adrenaline of the job. This was the zone. "Tell me the vitals," Madeline said, her voice hardening. "What are her SATs? Is she intubated?" Miller looked at her, impressed. He tapped his tablet. "Oxygen saturation is 82 and dropping. Trachea is deviated. They can't get the tube in. Significant swelling." "They need a cricothyrotomy," Madeline said instantly. "But if she's pediatric, the landmarks are hard to find. If they miss, they hit the jugular." "Exactly," Miller said. "That's why we came for you." Madeline looked out the window. 10 minutes ago, she was walking in the rain, wondering how she would pay her electric bill. Now she was flying in a military chopper to save a child connected to the highest office in the land. "Captain," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I hope you flew fast." "Supersonic, ma'am." The Black Hawk didn't so much land as it did drop out of the sky. The pilot flaring the rotors at the last possible second to cushion the impact on the wet tarmac of the O'Hare Air Force Reserve Base. The side doors were open before the wheels settled. Madeline's stomach was still somewhere back over the Chicago River, but her mind had snapped into a cold, hard focus. It was the trauma state, a psychological space where emotions, rent payments, and insults from arrogant doctors didn't exist. There was only the patient, the problem, and the solution. "Go, go, go!" Captain Miller screamed, unbuckling her harness. Madeline jumped onto the tarmac, her sneakers splashing in a puddle of jet fuel and rain. The noise was apocalyptic. Aside from the 2 Black Hawks, there were 3 massive C-130 transport planes, and looming in the distance like a white castle, the distinct humped silhouette of Air Force One. But they weren't heading for the plane. They were running toward a massive hangar 50 yards away. The hangar doors were open, spilling bright artificial light out into the gloomy afternoon. A perimeter of armored SUVs formed a steel wall around the entrance lights, flashing blue and red. "Stay close to me," Miller barked, grabbing her elbow to guide her through the maze of vehicles. "Don't stop for anyone." As they approached the hangar entrance, a wall of men in black suits, Secret Service, blocked their path. They looked like statues carved out of paranoia and granite. One of them, a man with a buzz cut and an earpiece that looked like it was wired directly into his brain, stepped forward, hand raised. "Hold it!" the agent shouted over the wind. "Who is this?" "The manifest lists Dr. Sterling." "Sterling is compromised," Miller yelled back, not slowing down. "This is the primary asset. Stand down, Agent Reynolds. I can't let a civilian without clearance near the package, Miller. We have a code red situation." Madeline stopped. She looked at Reynolds. She didn't see a federal agent. She saw an obstacle between her and a dying child. She stepped out from behind Miller, her soaked scrubs clinging to her. Her hair, a disastrous mess, holding her soggy cardboard box like a shield. "Agent," Madeline said, her voice surprisingly loud, cutting through the noise. "Captain Miller told me the patient has a crushed airway and oxygen sats in the low 80s. That was 5 minutes ago. If she's trending down, she's likely in the 60s now. That means hypoxic brain injury is starting right now. You can check my eye door. You can let me go inside and save her brain. But you have about 30 seconds to decide before the president's goddaughter becomes a vegetable." Reynolds stared at her. He looked at the badge clipped to her chest, the one that technically didn't work anymore. He looked at the fire in her eyes. He stepped aside. "Get her in." They burst into the hangar. It was a chaotic scene. A mobile field hospital had been set up in the center of the vast concrete floor. Bright halogen lights on stands surrounded a gurney. Monitors were beeping frantically, the high-pitched, rapid rhythm of a heart in distress. Around the gurney, 3 people in military medical fatigues were working frantically. Blood-soaked gauze littered the floor. "I can't get the view." One of them, a man with graying hair and sweat pouring down his forehead, shouted. He was holding a laryngoscope, trying to pry open the patient's mouth to insert a breathing tube. "There's too much blood suction. I need more suction." "Suction is maxed out, Colonel," a nurse yelled back. "Sats are 68. She's bradying down. Heart rate is dropping." Madeline dropped her box on a supply crate and ran to the bedside. The patient was a little girl, no older than 8. She was pale, her lips a terrifying shade of violet. Her neck was swollen, bruised, a deep, angry purple, the sign of massive trauma to the trachea. She wasn't moving. Madeline didn't ask for permission. She didn't introduce herself. She stepped up to the head of the bed, right next to the colonel who was failing to intubate. "Stop," Madeline said. It wasn't a suggestion. The colonel, Dr. Aris Vance, the chief flight surgeon for the Air Force unit, snapped his head up. "Who the hell are you? I'm the person who's going to tell you that you're digging around in a shattered larynx." Madeline said, her eyes locked on the girl's neck. "You keep trying to intubate orally, you're going to tear the remaining tissue and she'll never breathe again. Look at the subcutaneous emphysema." She pointed to the puffiness around the girl's collarbone. "Air is leaking into the tissues. Her trachea is transected." Vance hesitated. He was a good doctor, a battlefield surgeon, but this wasn't a soldier with a gunshot wound. This was a fragile child with a freak crush injury, and the pressure of the entire US government was breathing down his neck. He was shaking. "We need a surgical airway," Vance said, his voice trembling. "But I can't find the landmarks. The swelling is too severe. If I cut and miss..." "You hit the carotid or the jugular," Madeline finished for him. "And she bleeds out in 10 seconds. "I can't do it," Vance whispered, terror in his eyes. "I can't see anything." Madeline looked at the girl. She looked at the monitor. Heart rate 45. Oxygen 60. She stripped off her wet jacket, revealing her blue scrubs. She snapped on a pair of sterile gloves from the open box on the tray. "Give me the scalpel," Madeline said. Vance stared at her. "You're a nurse." "I'm a trauma nurse who spent 10 years in the busiest ER in Chicago," Madeline said, extending her hand. "I've done 3 of these in the parking lot. Give me the scalpel." Vance looked at the monitor. The flatline tone was seconds away. He slapped the scalpel into her hand. The hangar went silent. Even the Secret Service agents at the perimeter seemed to hold their breath. The only sound was the drone of the monitor, beeping slower and slower. Beep, beep, beep. Madeline closed her eyes for 1 second. She visualized the anatomy beneath the swelling. She pictured the thyroid cartilage, the cricoid ring, the tiny membrane between them. It was there. It had to be there. She opened her eyes. She reached out with her left hand, her fingers probing the girl's swollen, bruised neck. It felt like a water balloon. The landmarks were gone. "Come on," she whispered. "Talk to me." She pressed harder, ignoring the fluid shifting under the skin. She felt a tiny ridge, a hardness amidst the soft trauma. The cricoid. "I have it," she said softly. She didn't hesitate. With her right hand, she brought the scalpel down. "Not a vertical incision," Vance warned. "Too much bleeding." "I know," Madeline murmured. She made a horizontal cut, precise and confident. Blood welled up immediately, dark and fast. "Suction," Madeline commanded. The military nurse moved instantly, clearing the field. Madeline used the back of the scalpel handle to separate the tissue. She was looking for a white flash of cartilage. There, deep in the wound. "Tube," she said. "Size 4.0. Now." Vance handed her the pediatric tracheostomy tube. "I'm going in," Madeline said. She pushed the tube into the small incision. It met resistance. The cartilage was crushed. If she pushed too hard, she'd collapse the airway entirely. If she didn't push hard enough, the tube would sit in the false passage and blow air into the neck, killing her. She twisted her wrist, a corkscrew motion she had learned from an old Vietnam vet medic years ago. The tube popped through the resistance. She felt the give, the sensation of entering the windpipe. "Bag her," Madeline shouted. The nurse attached the ambu bag to the tube and squeezed. Everyone watched the little girl's chest. Nothing happened. "No breath sounds," Vance yelled, listening with his stethoscope. "You missed." "I didn't miss," Madeline gritted out. "It's a mucus plug. The trauma caused a blockage." She grabbed a suction catheter, threaded it down the new tube, and applied negative pressure. She pulled it back. A thick clot of blood and mucus came with it. "Bag her again." The nurse squeezed the bag. Whoosh! The little girl's chest rose. It was a beautiful, symmetrical rise. "We have breath sounds," Vance shouted, the relief in his voice cracking. "Bilateral breath sounds. Good air entry." They all looked at the monitor. The numbers were sluggish at first. Then they began to climb. Oxygen 70, 75, 85, 92, 98. The heart rate picked up. Beep, 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 beep. The purple color in the girl's lips began to fade, replaced by a faint, healthy pink. Madeline let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since she left the hospital. She secured the tube with the Velcro strap, her hands finally trembling now that the danger was over. "Sedation," Madeline ordered, falling back into her routine. "Keep her paralyzed. We need to minimize oxygen demand until you can get her to a surgical theater for reconstruction." "On it," the nurse said. Madeline stepped back from the table, peeling off her bloody gloves. Her knees felt weak. She leaned against the metal supply cart, wiping the sweat and rain from her forehead with her forearm. "That was—" Colonel Vance stared at the tube, then at Madeline. "That was the finest surgical airway I have ever seen. And I've seen a lot." Madeline managed a weak smile. "Just plumbing, doctor. Just plumbing." She looked around for her box. She just wanted to sit down. She wanted to call. Well, she couldn't call Mark. She realized with a pang of sorrow that she had no one to call. She had saved the girl, but she was still unemployed. She was still the woman who had been walked out of St. Jude's by security. Suddenly, the activity at the hangar entrance spiked. The Secret Service agents straightened up, hands clasping in front of them. The wall of suits parted. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a casual windbreaker and jeans, but his presence filled the cavernous space instantly. He was flanked by 4 men who looked even more dangerous than the ones outside. It was President Thomas Kane. He looked older in person than on TV. The stress of the office was etched into the lines around his eyes. But right now, he didn't look like the leader of the free world. He looked like a terrified uncle. He rushed to the gurney. "Emily." Colonel Vance stepped forward. "She's stable, Mr. President. Her airway is secure. Oxygen saturation is 100%. The president closed his eyes and exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He reached out and touched the little girl's hand. "Thank God. Thank God." He turned to Vance. "They told me she was choking. They told me you couldn't get the tube in." "I couldn't, sir," Vance said honestly. He was a man of integrity despite his earlier panic. He didn't take the credit. "It was a complex injury. I didn't have the angle." "Then who did?" the president asked, looking around the small team. Vance stepped aside and pointed to the woman, leaning against the supply crates, wearing rain-soaked scrubs and holding a soggy cardboard box. "She did, sir," Vance said. "Nurse Jenkins." The president walked over to Madeline. The distance seemed to close in slow motion. Madeline straightened up, feeling incredibly small and incredibly underdressed. "Nurse Jenkins," the president said, extending his hand. Madeline took it. His grip was warm and firm. "Mr. President." "You saved her life," he said, his eyes intense. "My sister, Emily's mother. She passed away 2 years ago. I promised I'd look after her. If we had lost her today—" He trailed off, emotion choking his voice. "You have the gratitude of a nation and the eternal debt of a godfather." Madeline nodded, not trusting her voice. "Where are you based?" the president asked. "St. Jude's, right. That's where Captain Miller picked you up. I want to personally call your administrator. I want to tell them they have a national treasure on their staff." Madeline froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. She looked at the president. She looked at Captain Miller, who was standing nearby, listening. She looked at Vance. She could lie. She could say yes, let him make the call, and maybe Sterling would be so intimidated he'd hire her back. But she looked at the cardboard box under her arm. The box with Mark's picture. Mark hated liars. "I'm not at St. Jude's, Mr. President," Madeline said quietly. "Oh, did you transfer?" Madeline lifted the soggy box slightly. "No, sir. About 20 minutes before your helicopter landed, I was fired." The silence in the hangar was absolute. The president's eyebrows shot up. "Fired? Yes, sir." "For what?" Madeline took a deep breath. "For insubordination. I administered epinephrine to a dying child while the chief of surgery was debating the insurance authorization. I saved the boy, but I broke protocol. The president stared at her. His expression shifted from gratitude to something much sharper, much more dangerous. It was the look of a man who commanded armies. "You were fired," the president repeated slowly, "for saving a child. Yes, sir, by Dr. Marcus Sterling." The president turned to his chief of staff, a woman standing silently behind him with a tablet. "Get the director of Health and Human Services on the phone," the president said, his voice low and cold. "And get the governor of Illinois on the other line, and find out who sits on the board of directors for St. Jude's Hospital." He turned back to Madeline, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. "Nurse Jenkins," the president said, "I don't think you're going to be unemployed for very long. But first, do you have a change of clothes? You look like you swam here." "I don't, sir. This box is all I have." "Well," the president said, putting a hand on her shoulder, "we're going to fix that, and then we're going to have a little chat about Dr. Sterling." An hour later, Madeline Jenkins sat in the executive conference room of Air Force One. The contrast was jarring. 60 minutes ago, she was shivering in the rain with a cardboard box. Now she was wearing a dry navy blue Secret Service windbreaker and sipping hot tea from a cup with the presidential seal. President Kane sat opposite her, reviewing a file his aides had just handed him. The little girl, Emily, had been airlifted to Walter Reed Medical Center by a specialized transport team. She was going to be fine. "I've read your file, Madeline," the president said, closing the folder. 20 years, perfect attendance, 3 commendations for valor during the pandemic, and not a single mark on your record until today. "Dr. Sterling is particular," Madeline said diplomatically. "He believes the hierarchy of the hospital is more important than the intuition of the staff. He believes he's God," Kane corrected her, his voice hard. "And today, he tried to play God with my family by trying to send himself instead of the person we asked for." Before Madeline could respond, the chief of staff, a sharp woman named Eleanor, entered the room. She turned on the large monitor on the wall. "Mr. President Madeline, you need to see this. It's trending. Where's the nurse is the #1 hashtag in the world right now." On the screen, shaky cell phone footage played. It was from the perspective of a pedestrian on State Street. The video showed the Black Hawk landing in the intersection, the wind whipping debris everywhere. It zoomed in on Captain Miller, sprinting toward Madeline. The audio was clear, cutting through the rotor noise. "We don't want the doctor. We want the nurse." Then the footage showed Miller throwing Madeline into the chopper and taking off. "The internet is losing its mind," Elena said, scrolling through comments on the screen. "Everyone is asking who the nurse is, why the military wanted her, and why she was standing on a street corner with a box of personal belongings in the middle of a workday." Madeline felt her face flush. "They saw the box. They saw everything," Elena said. "And the internet sleuths are fast. They've already identified you. They matched your image to the St. Jude's staff page. But here is the problem." Elena clicked a remote. The screen switched to a live news feed. CNN, breaking news. The chyron read, "St. Jude's Hospital addresses viral military incident." Dr. Marcus Sterling was standing at a podium in the hospital lobby, flanked by Linda Halloway from HR. He looked grave serious, the picture of concerned authority. "We are aware of the dramatic footage involving one of our former employees, Ms. Madeline Jenkins," Sterling told the bank of microphones. "It is a regretful situation. Ms. Jenkins was terminated earlier today for concerning behavior While I cannot go into specifics due to privacy laws, I can say that her actions endangered patient safety. She was in a state of mental instability. We believe the military may have been acting on outdated information when they extracted her. Madeleine gasped, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. That liar Unstable, I saved a boy's life. He's getting ahead of the narrative, Kane said, his eyes narrowing as he watched the screen. He knows the military picked you up, so he has to discredit you before you land. If you're a hero, he's the villain who fired a hero. If you're unstable, he's the responsible administrator who protected the hospital. On the screen, a reporter shouted a question. Dr. Sterling, can you confirm if the military operation was related to a patient at the hospital? Absolutely not, Sterling lied smoothly. We have the situation under control here. Ms. Jenkins is no longer a licensed practitioner at this facility. We pray she gets the help she needs. Madeleine felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't just her job anymore. It was her reputation. He was destroying her name on national television to save his own skin. He's going to win, Madeleine whispered. He has the lawyers. He has the board. I'm nobody. President Kane stood up. He walked over to the window of the plane, looking out at the tarmac where the motorcade was assembling. You're not nobody, Madeleine, Kane said. You're the woman who saved Emily, and I take it very personally when people lie about my friends. He turned back to her, a mischievous glint in his eye, the kind of look that toppled dictatorships. Eleanor, the president barked. Yes, sir. Dr. Sterling is holding a press conference right now. Yes, sir. He's taking Q&A for the next 20 minutes. Good, Kane said. Madeleine, grab your things. Where are we going? Madeleine asked. I have a meeting with the governor in Chicago this afternoon anyway, the president said, buttoning his jacket. I think we can make a detour. I think it's time we returned you to your car, and I think we should do it while the cameras are still rolling. The press room at St. Jude's Memorial was packed. Every news outlet in Chicago, plus the national bureaus, had crammed into the atrium. The viral video of the Black Hawk abduction was the most exciting thing to happen in the city in years, and everyone wanted answers. Dr. Sterling was enjoying the spotlight. He had rehearsed his lines perfectly. He played the victimized leader beautifully. It is never easy to let a staff member go. Sterling said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. Madeleine was a fixture here for a long time, but medicine requires precision, not vigilantism. We have strict protocols for a reason. But why did the military want her? A reporter from the Chicago Tribune pressed. A clerical error, surely. Sterling dismissed with a wave of his hand. I offered my own services to the rescue team, but in the confusion they grabbed the first person they saw wearing scrubs. It was a chaotic scene. Linda Halloway nodded in agreement beside him. We are currently reviewing our security measures to prevent such disruptions in the future. Suddenly, the phones of every reporter in the room lit up simultaneously. Buzzing, chiming, pinging. A murmur went through the crowd. Reporters looked down at their screens, then looked at each other with wide eyes. What is it? Sterling asked, annoyed by the distraction. A reporter in the front row looked up, holding his earpiece. Dr. Sterling, are you aware that the presidential motorcade has just exited the highway? Sterling frowned. The president is in town for a fundraiser. That has nothing to do with us. Sir, the reporter interrupted. They aren't going to the fundraiser. Traffic control says they've shut down Wacker Drive. They're heading here. Sterling froze. Here. Before he could process this, the sound of sirens began to bleed into the room from the street outside. Not one or two sirens, a symphony of them. The wail of police escorts, the heavy rumble of armored vehicles. The glass doors of the main entrance, visible behind the press pool, flashed with red and blue lights. 2 Secret Service agents in full tactical gear burst through the hospital doors, rifles held at the low ready. They scanned the lobby. "Clear the lane," one of them shouted. "Make a hole." The reporters, sensing history in the making, parted like the Red Sea. They turned their cameras away from Sterling and toward the entrance. Sterling stood alone at the podium, his mouth slightly open. Linda Halloway took a nervous step back. Through the doors walked 4 uniformed Chicago police officers, followed by the mayor of Chicago. Then came the Secret Service detail. And then walking side by side came President Thomas Kean and Madeleine Jenkins. Madeleine was still wearing the oversized Secret Service windbreaker, her hair tied back in a messy bun, but she walked with her head high. The president had his hand gently on her back, guiding her. The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like a strobe light storm. Questions were shouted, overlapping into a wall of noise. Sterling gripped the podium so hard, his knuckles turned white. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. The president didn't stop at the edge of the room. He walked right up to the podium. Sterling didn't move. He was paralyzed. "Excuse me, doctor," the president said. His voice amplified by the microphone Sterling was still standing in front of. "I believe you're in my spot." Sterling stumbled back, nearly tripping over a cable. Mr. President, We weren't expecting." President Kean ignored him. He adjusted the microphone. The room went deathly silent. "My fellow Americans," Kean began, looking directly into the cameras. "I apologize for the interruption, but I was watching Dr. Sterling's press conference from Air Force One, and I felt compelled to come down here and correct the record." He gestured to Madeleine, who stood to his right, looking terrified but resolute. "Dr. Sterling just told you that Madeleine Jenkins was fired for instability." Kean said, his voice rising with controlled anger. "He told you she was a liability. He told you the military made a mistake." Kean paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "The truth is," Kean continued, 2 hours ago my goddaughter suffered a catastrophic airway collapse. The best doctors in the military couldn't stabilize her. We asked for Madeleine Jenkins by name because she is the best thoracic nurse in this city, and when she arrived, she didn't just assist. She performed a life-saving surgical procedure that the flight surgeon was afraid to attempt. A collective gasp went through the room. Cameras zoomed in on Madeleine's face. "She saved my family," Kean said, "and she did it an hour after being fired by this man." Kean pointed a finger at Sterling, who was now sweating profusely. "And why was she fired? Because she saved another child's life against this man's orders." The reporters turned on Sterling like a pack of wolves. "Dr. Sterling, is that true? Did you fire her for saving a patient? Did you lie about her mental state?" Sterling stammered, holding up his hands. "Now wait a minute. There are complexities. Insurance protocols." "Insurance protocols," Madeleine spoke up. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was shaky, but it gained strength as she looked Sterling in the eye. "Leo was dying, Marcus. He was 8 years old. You were worried about a lawsuit. I was worried about his mother burying him." "This is absurd," Sterling snapped, trying to regain control. "I am the chief of surgery. I determine the fitness of my staff. You cannot just waltz in here and—" "Actually," the president interrupted, "I can do a little more than that." Kean turned to the side of the room. "Agent Reynolds." The Secret Service agent stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. He handed it to the president. "Dr. Sterling," Kean said, opening the envelope. "While I was flying here, I had the Department of Justice look into the billing practices of St. Jude's under your administration. It seems that prioritizing profit over patients is a habit of yours. We found discrepancies, massive ones. Sterling's face went grey. And, Kane added, turning to the cameras, I also made a call to the chairman of the hospital board. He was very interested to hear that the chief of surgery lied to the national press and the President of the United States. He's on the phone right now with HR. Kane looked at Linda Halloway. Linda, isn't he? Linda, realizing the ship was sinking and she didn't want to go down with it, nodded vigorously. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. She had clearly prepared it the moment the motorcade arrived. Dr. Sterling, Linda said, her voice trembling. Effective immediately, the board has voted to suspend your privileges pending an investigation. You are to be escorted from the premises. The room exploded into chaos. Sterling looked around wildly. You can't do this. I built this wing. I am this hospital. Mr. Henderson, Madeline called out softly. From the back of the room, the old security guard. Fast Eddie stepped forward. He had a wide, toothy grin on his face. He was holding a cardboard box, an empty one. I believe you know the way out, Doctor, Mr. Henderson said. And here's a box for your things. It's a bit small, but I'm sure you'll manage. The flashbulbs blinded Sterling. As he took the box, his arrogance finally crushed under the weight of his own hubris. President Kane put an arm around Madeline's shoulders. Now, Madeline, about your employment status. I have a job offer for you. But I have a feeling St. Jude's might want to make a counter-offer first. Madeline looked at the reporters at the president, and then at the spot where she had stood crying in the rain just hours ago. I think, Madeline said, smiling for the first time all day, I'm going to need a raise. The rain was falling in Chicago again, but this time it didn't feel like a funeral. It felt like a baptism. It was exactly 1 year later. Madeline Jenkins stood under a large white tent erected in the courtyard of what used to be St. Jude's Memorial. The hospital had undergone a massive rebranding. The sign above the entrance no longer bore the stark, corporate silver lettering of the old administration. Instead, warm, inviting letters read, The Madeline Jenkins Center for Pediatric Trauma. Madeline smoothed the lapel of her white coat. It wasn't the standard nurse's uniform she used to wear. It was the coat of the Director of Nursing Operations. Beneath her name, embroidered in gold thread, were the words, Patient Advocate Chief. You look nervous, a voice said beside her. Madeline turned to see Leo, now 9 years old, standing there in his Sunday best. He was the boy she had saved from the bee sting, the boy whose life had cost her a job and gained her a destiny. He looked healthy, vibrant, and was currently trying to sneak a third cookie from the buffet table. I'm a little nervous, Leo, Madeline admitted, crouching down to his level. Speeches aren't really my thing. I prefer IVs and bandages. You'll be great, Leo said, his mouth half full of chocolate chip. Just tell them the story about the helicopter again. That's the best part. Madeline laughed. I think everyone knows that story by now. It was true. The Black Hawk nurse incident had become folklore in the medical community. It had sparked a national conversation about nurse autonomy and the dangers of administrative overreach. Jenkins' laws were being passed in state legislatures across the country, protecting medical staff who acted in good faith to save lives during emergencies, shielding them from retaliatory firing. The crowd in the courtyard was immense. There were doctors, nurses, former patients, and military personnel. In the front row, sat President Kane, smiling like a proud father, with his goddaughter Emily beside him. Emily was 10 now, the scar on her neck, a faint, thin line, a badge of survival. But the most satisfying sight for Madeleine wasn't the VIPs. It was the staff. The nurses of St. Jude's were standing tall. They weren't cowering in the hallways anymore. They were empowered. They knew that if they spoke up for a patient, Madeleine had their back. The culture of fear that Marcus Sterling had built was gone, washed away by the storm of that one afternoon. Speaking of Sterling, his name was mentioned only in cautionary tales now. The investigation President Kane had launched unearthed a decade of insurance fraud and malpractice cover-ups. Sterling wasn't just fired. He was currently serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility for fraud. His medical license had been permanently revoked. Linda Halloway had turned state's witness to avoid jail time and was now working as a chaotic manager at a fast food chain in Ohio, a fate she likely found far worse than prison. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome the director of the center, Madeleine Jenkins." Madeleine walked to the podium. The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of respect. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Mr. Henderson, still the head of security, but now sporting a much nicer uniform and a significant raise. He gave her a thumbs up. Madeleine took a deep breath. She didn't need notes. "A year ago," Madeleine began, her voice steady and clear, "I walked out of these doors with a cardboard box. I thought my value was determined by an ID badge and a payroll number. I thought power belonged to the people with the biggest titles." She paused, looking at Leo and Emily. "But I learned something that power isn't a title. Power is the ability to help. Authority isn't given by a board of directors. It's earned by the trust of your patients. When we put on these scrubs, we aren't just employees. We are the last line of defense between life and death. And no policy, no protocol, and no administrator should ever stand in the way of doing what is right." She gripped the podium. "This center isn't named after me because I'm special. It's named after a nurse because it's a promise. A promise that in this building the patient comes first. Always. And if you have to break a rule to save a life, well, I suggest you do it. Just make sure you have a good lawyer, or at least a president on speed dial." The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers. As the ceremony wound down, President Kane approached her. "You've done good work here, Madeleine," he said, shaking her hand. "The hospital's mortality rate has dropped 15% since you took over the nursing protocols." "We're just letting nurses do their jobs, sir," Madeleine said. "By the way," Kane said, leaning in, "Captain Miller sends his regards. He's deployed right now, but he asked me to give you this." The president handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a patch, a military morale patch. It showed a silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter, and underneath the words, "We don't want the doctor." Madeleine smiled, the tears forming in her eyes. She closed the box and held it tight. "Thank you, Mr. President." "No," Kane said, turning to leave with his Secret Service detail. "Thank you, Madeleine." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the Chicago skyline. Madeleine walked back toward the hospital entrance. She stopped at the spot on the sidewalk where the helicopter had landed. The scorch marks from the tires were long gone, faded by weather and traffic. But she could still feel the wind. She could still hear the thunder. She looked at her reflection in the glass doors. She saw the wrinkles of 20 years of service. She saw the grey hairs. But she also saw a woman who had walked through the fire and came out holding the water. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a guardian. And she had a shift to start. Madeleine Jenkins pushed the doors open and walked back into the hospital, ready to save the next life. The story of Madeleine Jenkins is a reminder that true heroism often goes unnoticed until the moment it becomes absolutely necessary. In a world obsessed with titles, status, and bureaucracy, it is easy to forget that the most important people in the room are often the ones doing the actual work. Madeleine's journey from a fired employee walking in the rain to a national symbol of integrity proves that one act of courage can dismantle years of corruption. It teaches us that when systems fail, individuals must rise. And sometimes the cavalry doesn't come on a white horse. It comes in a Black Hawk helicopter, looking for the person who knows how to save a life, not just how to bill for it. And that is the incredible story of Nurse Madeleine Jenkins. It's crazy to think that she was fired for saving a life just minutes before the president needed her to do exactly that. It really makes you wonder how many heroes are out there right now, getting punished for doing the right thing just because it breaks a protocol. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more real-life dramas about heroes getting the justice they deserve, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.